Nelson pointed this out when we were doing the study. So Delitzsch and Salkinson and Ginsburg, which are true translations, they both use another word, which is different than Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew for entice. Delitzsch has V'im yadcha hayemanit tachshilcha katzetzotza v'hashlech mimcha. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. And we have there a play on words. We have a word pun between tachshilcha and hashlech. Right? It's what we call metathesis. The order of the letters are switched, but they sound similar, tachshilcha and v'hashlech. And I'm quite certain that Delitzsch, when he translated it that way from the Greek, he wanted it to sound more beautiful and maybe even be more memorable. So he introduced a word pun that's not there in Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. Salkinson Ginsburg, V'im yadcha yamanit tachshilcha katzitzeha v'hashlicheha mimeka. So it's even clearer in Salkinson Ginsburg, the word pun, tachshilcha and v'hashlicheha. Same two words. And I gotta wonder, I don't even wonder, it's quite clear to me that they're consulting, one is consulting the other. Based on the way this is written, it seems too much of a coincidence that they're using the same verbs. It could be a coincidence. Now here's an example where we have a word pun, which isn't in the original, at least in the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew Hebrew. Let's look in the Greek actually. Now I'm curious because I don't remember. Is there a word pun in the Greek and maybe they're trying to reproduce something in the Greek? That could be the case. So Matthew 5:29. So the word for causes you to sin is what we have in the Greek. Oh, it's skandalize.
That's right.
It scandalizes you. Or it's the word, we get the word scandal. Right. And then to throw it away is, excele. So there really isn't any kind of word pun. Bale, kai bale aposu, and throw it away from you. So take it and throw it away from you is what it says. So there's no word pun there in the in the Greek, but there is in Delitzsch and in Salkinson Ginsburg. And so here's an example where you got to be careful with word puns. Just because there's a word pun doesn't mean it's a Hebrew original. Nobody claims, as far as I know, that Delitzsch is the original Hebrew text, because Delitzsch tells us he translated it from Greek. And Salkinson Ginsburg not only tells us that he translated it from Greek, Salkinson tells us why he did it, because he found this very bad Hebrew translation in a bookshop, and he said, boy, we can do better than this.
Do you think they were being creative with the word pun?
Absolutely. They were trying to beautify the text.
Right.
They know about Hebrew word puns because they were great Hebrew scholars, and they're trying to make it flow better and sound nicer. So one or two Hebrew word puns could just be the work of the translator trying to beautify the text. It could also be a coincidence. So we have an example of a coincidence of a word pun in Genesis chapter 1. Right? So it says, she was called woman, Isha, because she was taken from Ish. Okay, so Isha comes from the word Ish, and she was called Isha because it's the feminine of the word Ish, the word for man. Well, it works in English too, right? She was called woman because she was taken from man. Happens to work in English, so that's a coincidence, right? So you could have a text that's full of word puns and it not be original to that language. It could be that the word puns were introduced by a translator. So you got to be very careful with the word puns. We definitely have Hebrew texts of the New Testament where there are word puns in the Hebrew and not in the original Greek, or Greek that we know it was translated from in most cases, or Latin in some cases it was translated from, or in that case it was translated from Catalan. And there are no word puns in the original language that it was translated from. And the word puns were introduced there because they're such an inherent part of Hebrew writing. So you got to be very careful about word puns, and assuming if you find 1 or 2 or even 10 word puns, that you have a text that was written in Hebrew.
Like Petros was a rock, you mean like that kind of thing?
Well, so you have a word pun there both in the Hebrew and the Greek. And let's assume that it was spoken in Hebrew, right?
Okay.
That's an assumption. Say assumption.
Assumption.
If we assume it was spoken in Hebrew and that Yeshua said to Peter, you are a rock, Even, and Evneh, I will build my house of prayer upon you, is what it says in Hebrew Matthew, or some form of that in the original that was actually spoken, then the Greek is trying to reproduce that word pun. It says, oh, there's a word pun here. let me express that in a way that my readers will understand it because they don't know Hebrew. Or even if they know Hebrew, they're not going to, like, we have to go to a dictionary to figure out what this word is.
Right.
Let's reproduce that in the target language. So there you have a word pun both in the Hebrew, this is Matthew, I think 16, both in the Hebrew and the Greek. And that's actually cited as a proof that Matthew was written in Greek because it has a word pun. Well, one word pun doesn't prove it. Gotta have a lot. And you want the word puns to really be interwoven with the text, to be an inherent part of the text. The text doesn't really make sense without them.